Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amir Rocha-Lima.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast is brought to you by Holland Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. I'm joined today by Catherine Edsall. Catherine is the founder of Cath Adventure, a travel company that offers all-female wildlife holiday expeditions. What's unique about Catherine is her relentless pursuit of her why, working through the challenges of motherhood and the difficulties this presented to her living the life she wanted, to setting up and successfully venturing into business. And be sure to listen to the end, where Catherine shares with us how she's leveraged her social media presence to make more people aware of her work and to attract new customers. So whether you're interested in knowing more about wildlife expeditions, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Welcome, Catherine Edsall, to the Inside Kingston podcast. Catherine, I'm really excited about this conversation because, well, for starters, I've always been fascinated with traveling to remote parts of the world. I know you've done a lot of that yourself. And I also think that you have a really interesting business niche. I think our listeners can learn a lot about the power of having a niche within their businesses from listening to your story. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in North London, so I wasn't an adventurous child at all. I was, North London, got the bus, the train, the underground. I was we didn't go anywhere apart from Scotland. And I think that's where I first got my inspiration from the outdoors. But that's because we had cousins up there, no other reason.
Fantastic. So sort of going up to Scotland, seeing the open spaces probably really triggered something in your brain.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, actually, as a child, I really didn't like the outdoors that much. It was more that all my cousins did, and so we had to go. We had to go for long walks, whether we liked it or not. And it did take a few years for me to actually embrace that fact that it didn't really matter if it was difficult. You know, that it wasn't. You could do it anyway if you put your mind to it. It was just putting one foot in front of the other. And I think, that took a while. I think I was about 19 when I finally got that message.
Oh, fantastic. And Catherine, did you go to university? And if so, what did you study?
Yeah, I did go to university and I studied performing arts. So I did music and theatre, and I specialised actually in physical theatre. So dance, physical theatre, that kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Catherine, could you tell us a little bit about your career journey before you set up your business?
So I did have a dance company. So when I left university, I continued to work in the arts, and I was in Nottingham, and Nottingham's a really good place for the arts. And coming from London, Nottingham seemed like I was suddenly the big fish in a small pond, whereas in London, it would have been the other way around. So we had a lot of support, a lot of financial support, and we had support from the British Council. So I did a lot of work out in Bulgaria with really incredible Eastern European theatre companies out there. And that continued for about 5 or 6 years, doing choreographing and working on new pieces. And then I decided that I needed a break. And so went off traveling to Costa Rica to work with the Leatherback Sea Turtle Conservation Project.
And what prompted you to move from that world of the arts to then starting your own business?
Well, it was a progression. So, like I said, it was artistic primarily to start with. And then because I always had conservation as a real foundation to my reason for traveling. So traveling for, just to go to pools and bars and stuff wasn't interesting to me, but to actually work on projects with endangered species was. So I started off doing that initially as a volunteer, and then getting more, as I got more experience, getting actually paid work. Volunteering was very different back then. You didn't have to pay to be a volunteer. You were actually you offered your services and you got all your food and lodgings. But then got more expertise, and eventually ended up becoming a forest operations manager for a big expedition company out in Indonesia. And I did that for a number of years, and I worked with different expedition companies in Africa, in Belize, in other parts of South and Central America. And it was only really after I had children, when I couldn't follow that sort of very wild lifestyle anymore, that I thought, well, how am I going to incorporate my sort of love of travel and conservation with also having a family? And it didn't actually start off as a business, this idea. It was more of a passion project, but it became a business because it was something, I think when you love doing something so much, that then it all flows and fits together quite well.
That's fascinating. And you're not the first listener to have gone through a journey where eventually you matched your passion for something with a business idea that then transformed itself into a company that is obviously profitable and helps support your lifestyle, but also links that lifestyle you want to have with the activity that you do. So I definitely commend you for that, Catherine. So bringing this conversation to the present, could you tell us a little bit about your business today?
So I have an expedition, an adventure company. It's called Cath Adventure. And it was predominantly set up because I wanted to encourage women like me who were mums, or, who were at home, or they had, maybe their kids had left home and they were wondering what to do next, to go and have a real adventure. Because for me, being immersed in wilderness, extreme wilderness, really gives you something. It really gives you an insight into your own nature that you can't actually get anywhere else. So it was combining sort of the stripping away of everyday life, going to remote locations, working with conservation projects, in this case with desert elephants, and then coming back. And also it's an all women expedition. So it's all women together who then come back and support each other. And also, as an individual, you then can move back into your everyday life feeling supported and empowered.
And the story behind your business is for me really fascinating, Catherine. And when you reached out to me on Instagram for us to be able to have this chat, I obviously did some research on your website, and I would just like to explore this idea of the desert elephants as being the most iconic matriarchs of them all. I mean, when I first went through that journey on your website, it instinctively struck a chord with me. But could you elaborate a little bit more on this idea for us? And also just give us some insight into what gave you the inspiration to sort of position your story that way?
Well, as I said, it was initially the fact that I was actually leading a lot of expeditions. Even though I had young children at school, I was leading expeditions all around the world. And it was other mums that came to me and said, oh, we'd really love to do something like that. Why can't we do something? And I thought, well, why don't I set it up for you? And then I was thinking, well, where would I take them? Where for me would be the most amazing place to take somebody whose, daily life consists of school runs and dishwashers and clothes and working and, just all the sort of humdrum and looking after kids. And I'd spent a good 3 months in Namibia tracking desert elephants down the ephemeral river valleys back in 2002. And there's something about these communities of elephants, because they are all female, they're a matriarchal herd, and that resonated with me. And being in somewhere so extreme that you don't see anybody else at all, that also resonated with me. So the iconic matriarch, and elephants are so powerful, they're so wise, they're so intuitive, they have these amazing family structures that includes the aunts and the sisters, and everyone looks after the children together. And this was something that I felt that we'd kind of lost in our communities, because we live very separate insular lives, and even more so now when we are really on our own. So that sort of idea of having that community sort of demonstrated to us by wild animals was something quite unique, I thought.
Yeah, I thought it was just a very powerful way of inspiring people to go through the journey that your business offers them. Could you tell us a little bit about the TED keynote talk that you gave? I think it's called Step into the Wild.
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting, I'd never done any public speaking before. And I was going to lead my first matriarch adventure. And somebody said, oh, will you, do you want to talk about it? We're doing this pub night. Do you want to talk about it? So I said, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So I spoke to 100 people. I had a PowerPoint presentation and it went really well. And I thought, well, that was easy. Why don't I do a TED Talk? Because I love TED Talks. When I'm ever feeling low or uninspired, that's what I'll go to for some inspiration. So I found out where London TED, I thought, well, I'm from London, I might as well do a London TED Talk. And they were doing one on confidence. And I thought, well, that's perfect, because that's the whole point of this expedition, is that the women come back feeling more confident in their everyday lives because they've sort of rediscovered something about themselves. So I applied to TED and I said, I'm doing this adventure and I'll be back, at the end of March, and I can tell you all about it. And they wrote back and said, brilliant. And it was that easy. And then I had to learn my words, which were not that easy. But getting the TED Talk, getting them to like the story was easy. But the actual production was, quite.
It's a very, very cool talk. So I'll make sure I link to that on the show notes. Catherine, you've already mentioned in this conversation the importance of sort of grassroots conservation projects to you. And it just got me thinking, do you tie that in any way with your business? So does your business or the activities you promote in your business support any conservation or charitable efforts at all?
Oh yeah, directly. So every person who comes on an expedition or an adventure is contributing directly. About half of the money will go directly to the local conservation organisation.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really cool. Catherine, can I switch gears on you slightly here? Because when I, again, was doing my preparation for this interview, I noticed that you're pretty active on social media, in particular Instagram. And I would just like to get some of your thoughts as to how you think about social media to highlight your work and attract new customers.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because it's not my forte. I'm very much in the present. I like being in the present, and that's part of why I lead expeditions, is because when you're in an expedition, you're in the present. Whereas Instagram is it's very flexible, and it also can promote something which doesn't exist. So there's part of me that I have a sort of love-hate relationship with Instagram, but the benefit of it is that it can open up a world that people haven't seen and give them an insight that then they can follow. So on my Instagram feed, they're all quite big pictures. Instagram obviously doesn't do them so much justice on a phone, but they are really big pictures of really big scapes. And so for me, it's to cultivate that feeling of being in that environment and to give a little bit of insight into it. So I think people see these pictures and think, gosh, I'd really like to have a little bit of that. And that's what I'm offering, is them to go where these pictures are.
Catherine, what are some of the key business lessons that you've learned throughout your life?
Well, I mean, I wasn't trained in business. I didn't go to business school. And I think this, like I explained before, this was something that came from within. It was something that I had to do rather than I thought about it logically. So if I had thought about it logically, I probably would have been put off by all the hoops I had to go through to get to this stage. But because it was more that I had to find a way to make it work. And I had an amazing support from individuals who, I was thinking, how do I do this? Because to all intents and purposes, I'm a travel company, even though that's not what I set out to be, but I have to be bound by those rules and regulations. So I had to find a way to do that so that I was doing it legally, I was doing it profitably. I had lots of help along the way. North Kingston Mums in Business is a great resource that is in my local area, and I joined their group just to have some feedback really and some support from other women in this world that I was not familiar in. So it's been a really intense journey over the last 3 years, especially at the beginning, to get it all set up and get it legal and get it running and get all the risk assessments in place and all the insurances in place, because obviously we're going to very remote areas. We need to make sure that everybody's safe, to get all the medical legal stuff in place. So it was a very, very steep learning curve, but now I'm there and it's all operational and running. It's much, much simpler.
Well, I think sometimes it's exactly what you alluded to at the top of the show, which is, as hard as something looks like, it might just be that it's just a question of putting one foot in front of the other. So eventually, if you just keep walking, you get there, don't you? Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many kind people out there who know more than I do in various subjects. So I just, there's always somebody who has an answer if you don't. Yeah, absolutely. When you look back at your career journey today, what are you most proud of? I think the fact that, because I always vowed I'd never be in an office. It was right from the beginning, even when I went into dance and, there was lots of administration to do. I was like, I'm never, ever going to work in an office. And I've kind of stuck with that. And, there were times when people were like, oh, well, you should get a real job. You should go back, do something normal. And I was thinking, well, actually, this is my real job. This is my real life. And I'm not going to compromise on what I believe in just because it's maybe not the status quo. So even though it is a business, it's not a normal business in some respects. So I'm quite proud of the fact that I've stuck to my guns and done it anyway. Absolutely. And what next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline you can tell us about? Well, at the moment, obviously things are quietening down on the travel front. So I'm just actually supporting the conservation organisation that I'm partnered with in Namibia, because they have also been closed down. So they need funds to support their monitoring elephants so that there's no problems with the elephant communities out there. So I'm supporting them financially. Also, I have new plans for October. So there's more Matriarch Adventures running in October. There's a new Mongolian horseback expedition running. It was going to be in September, but now I'm going to move it to next year, just because it will be more stable then. We've got lots of collaborations with different women who have slightly different elements to add. So I'm doing more vocal work on the next expedition. I'm going to do some movement work on the following one, partnering with women who have their own businesses, but they want to offer my expedition as part of their business model as well. So lots of collaboration and support as well. That sounds fantastic. As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Catherine, what do you do to relax outside of the office? Well, there is no office, but yes, I walk. So I love walking. Long distance walking is, that's my favourite pastime. At the moment, it's mainly geared to Richmond Park and big circumnavigations of that. But at other times, I will go on long distance hikes. So the Camino de Santiago in Spain is one of my favourites. I also like meditating, yoga. I'm also a trained yoga teacher. And I love singing, so I'm part of choirs and virtual choirs and that kind of thing. Cool. Are there any books that you've recently read that you would recommend to our listeners? Well, there's a great book called Wild by Cheryl Strayed, which is about her journey through the PCT, which is the Pacific Crest Trail in America. And there is a film also made of it, but the book's really good. And if you haven't read it, I would recommend it. It's about a very personal journey, and again, where nature is the redeemer of the situation. And I'm also currently reading a book called In Call of the White by Felicity Aston. She's another expedition leader. And this is a book when she got a group of women together from all the Commonwealth countries to go to the Antarctic and ski to the South Pole. It's
So that's another great book to read at this time.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah. Are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, Wild. If you haven't seen that as a film, I'd watch.
It's a very good film, actually. I vouch for it.
Yeah, it's a really good film. But recently, just because of all the situation we're in, I was given a great link to Cirque du Soleil, who are offering free circus online, seeing their amazing productions. So I don't know if you've ever seen them in the theatre, but watching them online when you can't get to the theatre is, almost as good. So that's what I've been watching.
Sounds like a very good shout. I've definitely made a note of that. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
So my website is the best port of call, and that's cathadventure.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. Not really Twitter. Facebook, you can see me as Catherine Edsall. It's very honest. It's very me. There's no illusion. I also have a Matriarch Adventure Facebook page as well. And then there's the TED Talk to have a little insight into how it all came about.
And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I add a link to those resources on the show notes. Catherine, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Oh, thank you so much.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.